Chapter 7. Why did she care? Why was she asking about him, about his family? He wasn't going to say a word, wasn't going to tell her of what he had left behind. That was his past, and it had nothing to do with the present, the here and now. It had nothing to do with the man that he was. Had it been up to his parents, he would be working in a factory making car parts, spending his weekends with the kind of wife they expected him to have, and their 2 kids. They'd probably be named Joni, who'd be 6, and Nicholas, who'd be 9. After 8 years with the company, he would get 10 vacation days that he would use to visit his family for a week during Christmas, a week with his wife's family during the summer, and then switch it the following year. He would drive an old Toyota Camry half-rusted and in the shop at least once a month, while the wife drove a minivan to tote their kids and all of their friends from soccer games to dance lessons. That was the life his parents had wanted for him to live, just above paycheck to paycheck, quiet and placid and ordinary. There was no reason to share these details of his past with this stranger, not when they were irrelevant to the man he was now. He could feel her eyes on him as she sighed into the silence, relenting to whatever inner battle she was going through. "Okay, I'll go first, which is strange," she said half under her breath, "because it's not something I like to talk about. But hey, who are you going to tell? It's not like you know my family or will even remember me once I'm gone. Why not tell you? So I'll just come out and say it. My childhood sucked, to put it nicely." He glanced at her from the corner of his eye, her head dropping so that she was looking at her hands folded in her lap. He said nothing, giving the woman only silent encouragement to continue. "My father is a neurologist who firmly believes that he is Superman and that everyone must be as accomplished as he, if not more so, in order to matter as a person. He served 10 years in the Marines, the last 4 being spent earning his medical degree. My mother, who was originally a receptionist at the hospital where my father interned, is an alcoholic who, upon meeting my father, became a housewife who leeches off of his salary. Her thoughts on life are that a woman should marry into the upper classes and then coast. She's accomplished nothing except creating every vodka combination you could imagine and single-handedly keeping Advil in business. My sister and I are best friends, bonded together through the criticism from both our mother and father. From Dad, we got lectures about how our education was the most important thing. Our home became a military-style boot camp to keep us on track as straight-A students. We were only allowed to spend time on anything other than academics if it would help us get a better career, and the only acceptable careers were in medicine, law, or something equally prestigious, art, sports, dance. All of these were considered a waste of time and were therefore banned from our household. From Mom, we got lectures about how we needed, above all, to be desirable and desired. Even at a young age, we were practically pimped out to other well-to-do families with young boys our age or a year or 2 older, as our parents tried to find a suitable match for us. Our marriages weren't arranged per se, but our parents were very adamant on who they expected us to. Wednesday, she paused as she struggled with her inner conflict. Now he was genuinely interested. Her family seemed the opposite of his in almost every way. Part of him wished that his father had been as ambitious as Brea's father was. Still, he couldn't imagine his parents pushing him into a marriage he didn't want, much less choosing the woman for him when she didn't. Continue, George urged her on. What happened? Did you marry? He hadn't planned on the next question spilling from his lips, but it suddenly mattered very much that he know the answer to the question. Are you married? Brea laughed, a sweet lyrical sort of laugh that made George want to join him, though he couldn't remember the last time he had genuinely felt the pull to laugh about anything. Married? She exclaimed. Oh God, no. This time, George couldn't contain himself from snorting at her response. If the question had been posted at him, then it would have made him react in much the same way. I said they had expectations, not that I did as they wanted. She huffed lightly. Though to be honest, I almost married. We had a date picked and everything. George was unsure if she stopped because the thought of this man still hurt, or if she thought George was uninterested, but he was very interested. He was afraid to make an attempt at pulling more information from her for fear that she would close up and decide that she had shared enough, but as they sat there in silence, he realized that she likely already had. So he had nothing to lose by asking. She'd either ignore him, evade the question, or she'd answer it. This man that you were to marry, what happened to him? I'm guessing your parents were pretty unhappy when the wedding was called off. Bray aside, turning so that she faced him. Her auburn waves spilling over one shoulder, the light of the fire casting deep shadows across her smooth face. Her back was to the arm of the sofa, her leg stretched out towards him, her feet only inches away. It was a casual move, but incredibly sensual as well. If he only placed his hand on the couch beside his thigh, he would touch her. She was wrapped tightly in the blanket that hid her live body from view, but she was still so close. He felt that tightening in his groin again, and he quickly readjusted his body so that the flames wouldn't cast a telling shadow across his stomach. My family was furious, so furious in fact, that neither one of my parents spoke to me for an entire year. I missed Christmas with them last year. She dropped her gaze in embarrassment. It's a 5-hour drive from my apartment to my parents' house. I called and left tons of messages, but no one would answer or return my calls. So I figured that if I drove up, if I was standing on their front steps, then surely they couldn't be so heartless as to turn me away. He saw that her eyes were damp, glistening as the unsteady light caught the tears and then released them. They did turn you away, though, didn't they? He asked, not realizing that he was leaning forward to wipe the tears until he'd finished. The move jolted her. It was such an intimate gesture. She pulled away a bit, masking the movement by nodding her head in answer to his question. My own parents turned me back out into the cold because the man that they want me to marry decided he didn't want to be with me. I had thought my entire life that I would be the one to turn down the marriage, that I wouldn't be able to go through with it in the end, though I was the one that wanted it and he didn't. But you're on speaking terms with them now, Bray chortled, if you want to call it that. Brandy, my sister, called a month ago to invite me to Christmas dinner. She had spent all those months just getting them to acknowledge that I existed, finally wearing them down to the point where they agreed to allow me to attend a family function. She said Mom and Dad wanted me there, but I found it very hard to believe at the time. I find it even harder to believe now. She shook her head as she laughed softly. Her hair swung behind her, loosened from her shoulder, the dark waves catching the light and creating a halo. It was my sister I spoke with earlier, and she admitted that my parents hadn't even realized I wasn't there. I nearly got myself killed driving through a storm to get to them, and they didn't notice one way or the other. Plus she had some news about my mom inviting a mystery guest. The guest, Eric, my ex-fiancé. He looked at her incredulously and was taken aback by how bright and innocent her eyes were. She lifted them to meet his. That's just typical for my mother, though. If something doesn't go the way she wants, and she can have any control over it, she takes it. So tell me, what was so amazing about this, Eric? She hesitated, opened her mouth to answer, and just as quickly she snapped it shut. I'm sorry, I'm talking far too much. What about you? What are your plans for Christmas? He narrowed his eyes for a moment before smiling warmly. You're avoiding my question, aren't you? He cocked his head to the side as he waited for her reply. Are you afraid of offending me in some way? She bit her lip in response, amusing. George, you weren't terribly concerned with offending me earlier, so don't hold back. Now tell me. He didn't know why, but he wondered why their relationship hadn't worked. Not that it matters, he reminded himself. He wouldn't see her again after tonight, he was sure of it.